Hello. Welcome to the Weather Skool podcast, where we dive into the world of meteorology, but with a twist. This isn't just about weather forecasts and storm tracking. We're here to hear the stories behind the meteorologists themselves. You'll get to know the people who bring you the weather every day, what drives them, what challenges they've faced, and how their personal journeys shape the work they do. If you're passionate about weather or curious about the lives of those who predict it, you're in the right place. So jump in as we explore the people behind the forecasts and discover what makes meteorologists truly unique. Welcome to Weather Skool, and this is the Weather Skool Podcast Project.
Hey there, it's Justin Kiefer from the Weather Skool Podcast Project, and we are once again talking to a meteorologist about their life in weather and outside of weather. So joining us today is Melissa Thomas. Melissa is an old friend and a great student of the weather, and also teaches a little bit as well. So we're going to get into her journey, her story about meteorology. But first off, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate you taking some time to talk to us.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to the podcast. I was stoked to hear about it, and then even more stoked to be invited on it.
Absolutely. Our goal with the podcast project is to talk to as many meteorologists as that I can and just get their stories, talk about their stories in their words, and find out a little bit about their journey through meteorology, their arc of their career, and kind of where things are going to go and head in their lives, and just get their stories to archive them, because the media as we know it, the television media or the broadcast media, is going to be changing a lot over the next few years, I believe. So I want these stories to be archived. I want a sort of a library, an encyclopedia of broadcast meteorologists and meteorologists in general, specifically some broadcast meteorologists. So their stories are on and sort of stay perpetual. So that's my goal for the podcast project. So we are here talking to you today. So thanks.
Oh my gosh. Yay.
Yeah. So Melissa, let's just go sort of talk early on. Let's do a little bit of bio about you right now, from where you began, your childhood growing up, and how you got interested in the weather.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when a lot of meteorologists talk about how they got into weather, you hear the typical, this is the event that did it. And then some do, some don't. But I don't really have an event that stands out in my mind of like, this was the hurricane that did it for me, or the blizzard of so year that, got me into weather. My dad was Air Force for 20 years. And for a big part of my life, I grew up in Okinawa, Japan. And so I want to attribute my love for weather. It goes back before my memory even started forming. So I don't really know when it started. I just kind of, when my memory comes into existence, I'm obsessed with weather at that point. And so what I think it was is that while he was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, they had the big typhoons, because in the Western Pacific, those that are watching that may not know, they go by typhoons, not hurricanes. There's even a satellite of Super Typhoon Kirk that went directly over Okinawa, Japan while we were stationed there. And you can see the island in the middle of the eye. Like,
Oh my goodness.
yeah. And so I was like, my brain was forming. I was like a toddler forming in this environment. And I think just that is where my fascination of what the skies are capable of probably came from. And then just from there into the next station was actually Panama City, Florida. It's here. So he retired here when I was about 9 years old. And then all my formative years from there, elementary school, middle school, high school has been in Florida. So hurricanes.
Yeah.
So we went from typhoons to hurricanes. So I've seen that raw power of tropical systems. And I was obsessed with that aspect of the skies since, very early in life.
Kind of fascinating. My dad was also in the Air Force. He was a pilot, and he always had seat of the pants meteorology. I mean, as a pilot. And so whenever there was a storm or there was, a cloud formation, he was always kind of looking up at the sky and sort of moving along with him. If we were playing golf or we were fishing or whatever we're doing, he had not only an affinity, but he was a very good forecaster. And I gleaned a little bit out of that. So it's an interesting sort of parallel similarity there as an Air Force.
Well, I tell people all the time, I'm glad you actually brought that up, because I tell my students this all of the time too. It is awesome to get an education in meteorology, and just get that really in-depth studies of it and a piece of paper that, shows my credentials. But there are plenty of non-degreed forecasters in the world that, for their job, they need to be good at forecasting. Pilots, farmers, in Panama City Beach, the mariners, the sailors that go out, it's, you can get your forecast from somewhere else, but you're probably going to be even safer if you know how to do some rudimentary forecasting as well.
Yep. And we're gonna circle back to a point you just brought up about
Yeah, yeah.
someone that we know that we are both know very well, and I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
So, growing up in Panama City, Florida, you come through high school. As a high school student, there's opportunity to go do many things, and you obviously had a love for weather. How did you get from, okay, I'm graduating high school, and to say, oh, I'm going to study this in college? And so, if you could, because your story is interesting, and it's also a testament to your perseverance and your persistence about getting through the meteorology department that you went into. So, take us through those steps if you could.
Well, I graduated high school. I knew I was obsessed with weather. I even have a childhood friend recently brought up a memory I don't even have in my working memory of being in high school, hanging out in our living room, and a storm blows over. And he recalled recently that I got up, you could hear the storm coming, and I dragged all of us out to the front porch to just hang out on the front porch and watch the storm. And I was like, oh, yeah. He's like, yeah, it makes sense what you did in life because you were always obsessed with weather. And I have memories of you doing that. And so I graduate high school, I go to Gulf Coast State College. And so my journey into meteorology was not a linear path. It was more of a polynomial path. That thing wiggled up and down a lot. And I took and this is actually, I need to tell my students this. My first ever weather class, I actually got a D in. Yeah. I
Yeah.
was not the best first foot out the gate with education and a love for weather. And believe it or not, my atmospheric science teacher at Gulf Coast State College was News Channel 7's Jessica Foster.
Okay.
Yeah, so that
Yeah.
was really cool. So when I actually became a meteorologist on TV locally, I was hoping she did not remember me in my bad grade. But so unfortunately, my first time through college, so through high school with my love of weather, and then into college as an early adult, 18 through 21, I was actually moving through, I now know, didn't at the time, undiagnosed ADHD. So I struggled in high school. I got good grades and I got a scholarship, but it was a struggle. And then at college is such a different world, and I actually ended up failing out of college. Not really failing out of college. I withdrew from college, seeing the failing coming. So I'm like, oh, let me go ahead and back up before my GPA is wrecked. And then I actually worked many jobs in Bay County, had nothing to do with weather, banking, waitressing, call center work, anything you can think of, lots of different jobs. And all I learned from all of them is I don't like any of this. And so I need to find something I love. Like I need to do something that's fulfilling for me as a person, or I'm just not going to keep a job longer than 2 years. Also, undiagnosed ADHD kind of attributed to that as well. So it was a big of a struggle right out the gate. And then I looked up to some of the people in my village who have done careers for 20 years and longer. And I said, how did you do this job for 20 years? How did you stick to this job for as long as you've had? Because in my experience at 25, since 18, I can't keep one for longer than 2 years. Not because I can't do it. I was good at every job I did. I just walked away from all of them because it didn't do it for me, you know? And so the common denominator between all of those answers was I just love what I do. And that was just the answer for every single one of the people that did their jobs for decades. So I went back to college and I'm trying to still figure it out. I'm taking all these math classes to refreshen up on math and just get my prereqs in order. And then I start to find out that I'm really good at math. And so I'm thinking, okay, do I want to make a lot of money and become an actuary? They deal with the insurance and math and make a lot of money. But I already knew in my heart money didn't really matter to me. So I kept kind of, what can I do with math? And I'm really good at math. What can I do? And I went on some random forum on the internet and people were talking about meteorology, like I said, I love weather. That's actually what got me started on it. I typed in, I love weather. What about meteorology? And then some veteran meteorologist on the forum had said, you better be good at math if that's going to be your path. And I went, that sounds like a sign right there because I'm finding I'm really good at math out of nowhere. And then that, got me into the program at FSU eventually through my mid 20s. So I had gone back to college, went to FSU, put my nose to the grindstone because
Right.
of my experiences in education prior to that. I knew, and I told myself this, I don't care how hard the math is, and I don't care how hard school is for me. I'm still undiagnosed at this point. I don't know how hard the path is going to be through education, but I did promise myself that if it meant working 6 times harder than the kid next to me, literally as a 25-year-old, the kid 18-year-old next to me,
That's right.
I would. And I did go on to do that. It was not easy. It was a struggle. I had to get a lot of help from my peers and study groups. And there were a couple times in the journey at FSU towards the end there that it really got rocky because I was also working full time as a non-traditional student. So you're juggling a really difficult program full of, thermodynamic equations. And then you got to go work till 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night slinging dinner plates,
Hello. Yeah,
and then
life.
get some studying in
That's right.
before 8 a.m. classes roll around.
My
Yeah,
goodness.
but we did it with the support of a lot of wonderful people in Tallahassee. I was able to graduate with my degree and keep that promise to myself. And I ended up working 8 times as harder than the people around me, not 6.
And not to, that's a pretty unique story. I mean, if you think about you're in a class, and like you said, there's probably people 6, 7 years younger than you who are probably just, dynamic whiz students coming out and just crushing their undergraduate and then their major coursework, who aren't working. They're there on a scholarship, or they're there, however they're financing their life. And you are going, I got a whole different path that I'm taking, but at the end of the day, we're going to wind up in the same spot. And
Yep.
that's an awesome.
And
Go ahead.
to their credit too, I couldn't have done it without a lot of them. They took
Wow.
they took that privilege, they took those resources they had that I didn't, and drug me to the finish line with them. So I'll never forget some of those personalities there.
Oh, that's awesome. And this is about the time in your life that we met,
Yes. Yep. Oh
because
yeah, that's right. Even before I graduated. Yes. It was the summer before my senior year.
you were in one of those non-weather jobs as a server at a
Yep.
fantastic restaurant in Panama City, well, St. Andrews, Florida. And a fellow that I was working with, so this is that little circle back moment,
Oh yes.
Jerry Tabbitt, who was a non-degreed, non-traditional
Yes.
meteorologist. He was a meteorological technician in the United States Air Force and had worked at Tyndall Air Force Base as a forecaster for the flight crews and the flight squads, and he would present their forecasts for their plan of the day and things like that. And I worked with him. He was a forecaster and a meteorologist that I worked with at the ABC television station in Panama City. And he said that you were interested in getting an internship, and the hours worked out best for you to come and intern with me, or at least spend some time
Yep.
on the TV side of what we did. And so there is this almost a full circle moment of these people who perhaps didn't go to college to get a meteorology degree, but were weather people that you
Forecasters.
met
Yeah.
in life outside of television or meteorology. But then our paths crossed as you interned when I was the chief meteorologist at that ABC station. So
Yes.
interesting little bit of a synchronicity, if you
Yeah.
will. And I'm glad that that the captain's table is back open, by the way.
Yes, so happy for, and they got me through college. I attribute a lot of my journey to them as well. I went back to college almost around the same year I started working for them. And the owner of the restaurant even sent me like a recommendation letter and set me up with a restaurant in Tallahassee that was, a family owned restaurant there that's really well known. And then they ended up going on and I wanted to bring this up eventually along my journey. And I guess this is the segment to do it. We're talking about college and graduating. I would not be a meteorologist without the family in Tallahassee when their restaurant. Because as I was finishing up my final classes, what I had mentioned, almost having no minutes to study with being in class, then having to go to work. And then, some nights you have to choose sleep over studying. And then if you do choose studying, you have 4 or 5 classes and you got to pick which one you're going to prioritize. And towards the end, I'm prioritizing. I have these 2 classes, and I'm prioritizing it in a way that I think is going to work for me. We've got it all planned out, and one of them was the lovely Dr. Alquist's course, good old Dr. Alquist, and he had these like little like homework assignments. And then I would go and pass his tests, but I wouldn't do the homework assignments because I was passing the tests. I wasn't really worried about the little homework grades. And I prioritized studying for the other thermodynamic exams more. And the goal was to pass that test and then I'd be fine. That last test in Dr. Alquist's class, I passed it, but it was on the line so much that the homework I didn't do made or broke the grade. Yes. And so I actually was not going to graduate without that class, and I didn't have the funds or the time to like stay. So it kind of felt like a very this is done moment. You
Mm,
have prioritized poorly, not for like lack of wanting to do the work or being lazy, literally just not enough minutes in the day being a non-traditional student.
that's right.
And so I was never one to really like ask for exceptions or anything like that because I made my plan, it didn't work out, and it is what it is. But my boss overheard me just kind of worried about the situation, and she wrote a recommendation on my behalf. The daughter of the family-owned business wrote this whole letter about how this is not a student that was out partying and blowing off your homework. This was a student juggling too much and basically just went to bat for me. And when Dr. Alquist read it, he came back and said, I don't normally do this, but it takes a lot for someone to write a character reference like that about you that's already out in the workforce and in what they wrote. And he goes, you have the summer to finish the homework. And while I graded it easy for everybody else, I'm grading it this summer for you.
Wow.
And I was like, so while I'm interning with you, I am working at the restaurant, interning at WMBB, taking 2 other summer classes, and also fitting in the homework last minute that's really going to be analyzed for him.
My goodness.
Yeah. And so I would not be a meteorologist without that family on my journey in the peripherals and Dr. Alquist being so, accommodating and understanding of my particular journey.
That's heartwarming. It really is.
Yeah.
That,
Had to give him a shout out for that.
all those sort of threads of people and their hearts and their lives come
Mhm.
together to help. And that gets you through that summer, gets
Mhm.
you to a graduating point. And so I would imagine we're now talking about 2000 or
Oh, no. Yes. Okay. So it was the summer of 2018, yes, that I
yeah,
interned with you. Yeah.
that's right. Because at that point you were still, I'm guessing from our conversations, that the TV weather was an avenue for you to take the meteorology and create a career. And so we had worked on that some as my intern. I don't know how good I was at that,
You were
but
great.
well, thank you. But obviously, at the end of that hurricane season, we had Hurricane Michael, which sort of disrupted, obviously, everything. Hurricane Michael, for those who haven't watched some of the other podcasts, is a common theme on a lot of these podcasts so far, because I've talked with a lot of people who had to work and live through that along the Gulf Coast in October of 2018. You were at, I would guess, at Florida State that event,
Yes. Yes.
knowing that your town was about to get hit. Do you have any? I don't want you to get deep into that, but what
Yeah.
do you remember about that?
Well, I can definitely speak on it now a little bit more composed than I used to be able to, because it was a very insightful experience, very enlightening. When as a student, I'm forecasting it, and I'm also forecasting it alongside my professors who are like the top in their field with tropical research at FSU, and when they're getting worried, as a student, you're like, no, and so I was planning to come in, of course. I was a storm chaser, dragging people out to the front porch to watch a storm. I'm coming in for a possibly major hurricane coming into my home. But at the same time, I'd also fallen in love with my sweetheart, who was a firefighter and Army National Guardsman. And he still is an Army National Guardsman. And so he responds to all of the hurricanes. And this one was coming straight for him and his people, which is an interesting side note on that. But he called me. We'd been dating for 6 months. And he said, we have never had a fight. We're about to have our first argument. And I was like, please no, please don't ask me what I think you're about to ask me. I'm coming into the storm. And he said, hey, you know what's coming. You, of all people studying what you study, know what's coming. And do you really want your professional foot out the door, to be coming into the disaster zone, get stuck, and take away from resources that could go to people that really didn't understand what was being communicated to them? Shook. It made so much sense. And I kept my butt sat in Tallahassee. I said, well, you thought we were going to fight, but that was the most like wisest perspective you could have given me. And I think I will stay in Tallahassee and let you do your job and your peers do your job without having one more person to have to spread resources with who should it really would look really unprofessional. You should have known better,
Yeah.
and especially if I'm not there on an actual, with a team or with a, purpose and a job. Just going into storm chase didn't feel right. And so I hung back, and some days I'm like, ooh, I wish I'd been under the storm, just because of the storm chaser in my heart, But it gave me an experience I will never forget. And I think a lot of people, when we are covering storm victims inside the storm, under the storm, and living after the storm, the peripheral people that love these people are kind of left out of the story a bit, because there is this nuance and very intense fear and anxiety of being outside and watching what's coming for your loved ones. And then when it occurs, you have that loss of communication when the power goes out. And I had a radar scope going up, the little radar, of the eye going over Panama City. And I will never forget the thought that went through my head when I saw the eye move over my childhood home in
Right.
Callaway. I
Yeah.
knew they were going to see blue sky. I had lost contact an hour before. And I remember thinking very vividly, am I watching my parents die live on radar? You'll never forget something like that. And people don't, they really don't, those stories don't really get told quite as much, like how
That's right.
traumatic that is for the people on the outside. And then on the back end of it, once everybody's got connection, everybody's okay, you've gotten contact with everyone. And then you just go on about your life in Tallahassee, where there were some down trees. They had category 3 winds off to the peripheral of it as it was going north. Maybe not category 3, but strong enough winds to really, really blow some really old, beautiful trees down. To be feeling that on your heart, your crushed hometown. And then another town is just going on about their day, and it's like the storm never happened a week later, and all your student buddies are like, let's go study at the Love Building, and you want to go party tonight? And I'm like, nope, my hometown is crushed and we're trying to figure stuff out. And it's heavy on your heart, and you're in the grocery store hearing people go, didn't the storm happen the other day, like over in Pam? And it's just so, it's the twilight zone. It's the twilight zone when you're moving through something like that. So it was an
Yeah.
interesting experience to keep that in mind for people on the outside of storm zones.
You bring up a great point, because when the cell towers went down, and so cell communication was getting really sketchy. But at WMBB, we were still able to get our signal on the internet. We had generator power, and we're still able to put out on Facebook and on a live stream. And so my family had evacuated, and so they're watching from a distance. And we're having some text back and forth, but we're in the middle of the hurricane, so I couldn't respond to a lot of the text. And then the feed just gets cut, at 12:32. So they don't know what's going on. They have no idea.
Yep.
And I don't know that for 2 days.
Yep. 2 days. I think it was 36 hours for me. After I had that thought watching the radar, I didn't get my answer for 36 hours.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it was only because a family friend walked her AT&T phone a mile over the rubble to put it to my dad's ear so I could hear his voice and get back to her recovery.
Yeah. The
Yep.
AT&T service on one cell that stayed up.
Yep.
And so there was a reporter who had come into town from a different TV station who was in our building, who had a AT&T phone.
Oh,
And
yep.
so he was able to get out a very garbled phone call, and then we sent a quick text. But he was, and so we had no power, so he couldn't keep that phone charged. And so he was like charging his phone off of some batteries that were not really designed to do that. It's just crazy trying to rewire your life in the hours right after that hurricane. And so then when it was probably, so the storm hit on a Wednesday, the 10th of October. It was
Yep.
probably Friday or Saturday. I was visiting some people on the north side of Panama City in a town called Lynn Haven. And Verizon had finally gotten a tower up, a temporary tower on the north end of the county. And I got out to that point where my phone finally pinged off of that tower, and all the texts,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
thousands of texts, started rolling in that I hadn't received.
Yep. Yeah, it is an event for everybody inside and outside of it. You're just
Right.
forever connected by that.
Yeah. So the rebuilding part of that from a infrastructure, from a life structure,
Yeah.
Certain things happened, and meteorologists who were at that TV station left, including myself. And that opens the door for a position of on-air TV meteorologist, to which you stepped in and started working at that TV station. I'm not quite, I don't recall the time, but I think it was in 2019, I would guess.
Yes. It
Yeah,
was Christmas after graduation of 2019.
yeah.
Yep.
And so that's when you began as a broadcast meteorologist in
Mhm.
television, being able to talk about the weather and live in meteorology and work in a job. And I'm living out of state, so I don't get to see much of how your progress and how your
Yeah.
initiation into that went, because we hadn't really stayed connected because of we were moving around in the winds of that after the hurricane. But how did that? I mean, and I don't think I've ever asked you this question. How did that go initially, and how did you feel stepping on the air and talking about weather for a television audience?
That is such a great question because the the initiation and the first time I did it was an absolute dumpster fire. But it was such a good experience, though. And I wouldn't have it happen any other way. I actually went to college with no interest in getting into TV. I thought that actually might make a good little side note. I had no idea what I would do with it. I just wanted to get my degree and be a meteorologist. But whenever people would hear I was studying to be a meteorologist, it was, oh, you want to be the weather woman on TV. And I was like, no, I don't know if I want to, like, that's just, I don't know if that's the path for me. I'm a little, like, I talk a lot, but I have more social anxiety than people realize. And I just never saw that for me. And so I ended up falling in love. And when I thought my degree would take me anywhere in the nation, I was just going to get like apply to the National Weather Service, apply to consulting jobs, anything out there. And then I end up coming home because his family's here, my family's here. He's got a career already. It just made sense. So I come home, and there's not very many options in Bay County for meteorology other than TV. And then maybe if you have some, like, maybe if you're a veteran, possibly I think there's some contracts on the base,
All
and
right.
maybe the port had some weather stuff buried. I was on the hunt, couldn't find anything that was obvious at the time. And my family was like, well, we want to see you use your degree. Like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I guess I can go apply to the station. I did have my internship, then that was like good experience to like do weather. And so maybe, I'll just apply there. And then initially I was told I didn't have enough experience. And I was like, well, I tried, family. Don't have enough experience. And then they ended up losing their weekend meteorologist like overnight, from like a Sunday had the meteorologist, and then Saturday did not have the meteorologist. And to fill those positions can take a while. So that was, a position that they were in. And I got a call from the new chief at the time after you had moved up north, and he gives me a ring and he goes, "Are you still in town?" And I was like, "Yes." And he goes, "Come on over." And I was like, "Ah." So I'm excited, I get over there, and I take it for what it is. I'm like, you know what? I never saw myself in TV, but I'm about to work as a meteorologist and like get some experience, and I'm excited for this, and it's a dream come true. And we spend a couple days training. I got 3 days of training, just because it was such a tight, turnover. And my first night on air, where I'm set off to fly free, and I would not have done as well as I did without the amazing training I had had leading up to that. I woke up that morning. I'm talking 6 hours of the script in my head. I've got my forecast ready. I know the forecast like the back of my hand. I've been in it for days. I've been in it all morning. I'm driving to work. I'm saying what I'm going to say on air. Just going over and over. I'm sitting there building my graphics at the station. I'm perfecting it. Again, going over my script. I'm in front of the green screen 10 minutes before going on air, which is stupid early, just standing there and just going over my script, still going. I'm ready to go. I hear it in my ear. We're on air in 5, 4, 3, 2, and we roll. Intro, it gets to my hit, and I realize behind me, all I see is a really zoomed up and still picture of the partial triangle of a cold front. And that is all you see on the screen behind me. And it is in that moment that I realized I had not hit play. I had zoomed in on
Yep.
something, and that graphic was going to be there for 3 whole minutes, and it was not going to move.
Wow. What did you do?
I had an internal meltdown until I realized, well, you can't cry on air and you can't walk off because you're going to get, fired. And I just realized you have a story to tell. Just tell the story. And so I was able to, like, And my I had all my family tuning in, even streaming from Illinois. And I just start talking. Well, I'm having a bit of technical difficulties, guys. We're zoomed in on a little cold front here, and it's a great segue into the cold front we're gonna have this week. And I just talked for 3 minutes about what they could expect for the week ahead. And when I got it off air, I thought, oh my gosh, the chief is gonna be so mad. My family's gonna be so like laughing and disappointed. And I get to my cell phone and I've already got a text waiting from the chief who says, you know what? Considering the technical difficulty, you really ran with that. Good job. And I've got text from my grandpa going in the middle. You could tell he's texting me in the middle of the hit, like I'm going to be able to read it. Breathe, breathe. You've got this.
There you go.
So that was my initiation. And it was only up from there. Every hit was better after that.
I don't know how many times I've walked away from setting up all the graphics and not put the show, the graphical slideshow, in play mode. I would say dozens of times. And that first time you do it, you're like, like you said, what do I do? And eventually, because again, over the course of a long career, you do this a few times. You just get distracted and you forget. And so at that point, it was like, at some point along the way, I was like, I'm just going to go over there and put it in play and just narrate
Yes,
the
yes, you
whole
did.
thing,
Yes,
and
I
then
did
come
not.
back and say, hey,
Later in my career, or later in my like stint in news, was about a year and a half. Yeah, that was not a big deal if that happened. You do get to that point where you're so comfortable and you're like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm just going to walk and talk. And but that first day, and the chief at the time, or he still is the chief of their chief meteorologist, Ross Whitley, he was so stellar because very shortly after that, I could tell he made sure to get into conversation with me. His story about when he started out and some mentor or someone had told him, you're terrible, but we're gonna get you there. And he just was like, you have no idea, like, it's not a bad start, it could be worse. And everybody has to start somewhere. And like, this is not you are in your head, this is gonna be the worst way you could have started. And that's just purely our own self-critic. Like, you just know you get better. No one starts like good at this.
my my the two stories in Tallahassee when I began my career. One was even before I was on as a television meteorologist, but I was watching someone at another station, and in that particular studio, an iteration, this was again back 40 years ago or so, the weather office was a long way away from the studio, and there was stairs and whatnot, and it was a late night newscast, so there's not many people in the TV station late at night. And he had forgotten to do that. He'd forgotten to put the slideshow in play. And you heard him run up those stairs into his office because he had asked on the air if there's somebody who could go into the weather center and hit the space bar, which I guess would have engaged that slideshow. And nobody did. So you heard him run up the stairs into his office, down the stairs. So that was one thing I remember. And the other part, my very first broadcast, the microphone that has most cases a little clip, the one that I was using actually anyway, the microphone popped off while I was speaking and like went down to the floor. And it's like, well, they're not going to be able to hear me, so what do I do? So I stopped, I reached down, I picked it up, and I just held it then for the rest of the time. But, it's sort of, there's an interesting part of what you are doing then and what we do as broadcast meteorologists is sort of like you have your plan and you're going to work your plan, but there is always this, what's your ability to respond when something happens,
Mhm.
what's your, it's beyond sort of your responsibility. It's just your ability to respond, whether it's a crisis or it's a moment, or it's like you said, you forgot to hit play.
Yep. You
And
got to be ready to dance.
yeah, it makes you grow as a communicator, and it makes you grow as the impromptu part of the broadcast, the art, the communication art of the science of meteorology when you're on television. But I know that your television career doesn't span decades,
Mm-mm.
because at some point, I think you just said a year and a half or
Yep,
so.
yep.
Yeah,
I was December 2021.
there is a transition from broadcast meteorology to something not that. And so, you don't have to get into any detail of what happened, but at some point, something happened because
Oh yeah.
you're currently a teacher a high school teacher. And so obviously you didn't start out as being a high school teacher. So there was a transition here from one career to the next. Can you spend a few minutes
Yeah,
talking about that?
it's actually something I can go into detail about because it is very simple. I never saw myself in TV. It's not the type of meteorology that I went into college for. And then so doing it for a year and a half was my experience to confirm that. And after about a year and a half, I was like, this is a lovely experience. And I love having my hands in weather every day and forecasting and being like a paid meteorologist. But this still is not for me. This isn't my love. Like, I don't love TV meteorology.
There you go.
And so I just had some soul searching and was like, there's maybe something else out there. I don't know what it is, but I'm gonna go ahead and start trying to make myself available to finding it. And at the time, we were running news segments of the extreme shortage of substitute teachers in the county. And I was like, well, let me just try to fill that need. And while I was transitioning out of news, started to substitute teach as my segue and job searching for remote positions for meteorology. Because by that time, I had done some research and I realized you don't have to really move anywhere for a specific, just because Bay County doesn't have a lot of meteorologist positions. I can still be a working meteorologist with the remote positions that are exploding across the nation. And so I go on the hunt for that, and I'm substitute teaching while I do that. And I'm starting to find the world of teaching is very interesting. It's an environment I am finding I thrive in. ADHD and being able to like work in tornadic metaphorical situations with communications and everything going on, it was like this is a good fit. And then I took a long-term position for a lady that was on maternity leave, and then I got to really be the teacher for 3 months, like build relationships with the kids. It was like a biology course, and I'm really finding this like something's blossoming inside of me, and I'm not only starting to notice it, but my leadership is starting to notice it at the high school I was and am at. And they already started putting the bait out there, like, ooh, we got a possible teacher here, because there's also a teacher shortage, so they're zoning in. And eventually, as the long-term position is wrapping up, my direct leadership approaches me and goes, he loves to retell it as, I asked her, what you doing next week? And what you doing next week turned into a career.
Yeah.
Because that was just what he wanted to talk about was, how about you just become a teacher? Here's the path, here's the alt certs, and we'll even like, I joke now that I teach, like, it is a dream come true because I still get to have my hands in weather. I teach a meteorology course at the high school level in Bay County. And I want to say it is the first meteorology course at the high school level in Bay County. No one's corrected me. I haven't been able to find any evidence of another meteorology course at the high school level. And so, but they gave me one class of that. And it's like, if you teach all these math classes, we'll
Yeah.
give you one class of weather. And I was like, deal. Because you got to go through calculus 1, 2, and 3 to be a meteorologist, and I have a minor in math. So it made me like perfect candidate for the math teacher shortage that is just extreme across the county and the nation. And so it was just a good fit for both of us. Uh, Teaching math for them, I get to stay in meteorology, teaching my meteorology class, utilize my degree in like a paid sense every single day. And then an odd development in that journey is that I thought I would be putting up with the math classes to teach the one class I love. But I think I'm starting to, don't tell my weather kids this, like, love teaching math more. I like really love my math classes, my AP pre-calculus courses. That's got my heart. I never saw this coming. The kid that like failed out of college essentially, struggled through high school, needed it, all of her smarter, younger friends' help to graduate the meteorology program, somehow ended up a math teacher who loves it. There's a lot of versions of me who would have never believed this outcome.
That's a
If I
pretty that's a pretty cool arc. I mean, that's just a
Yeah.
really, really neat story. To get to where you're now being able to pour your passion, for two different things. Because you said
Hmm.
you love math and you also said you love weather.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. I didn't even
Yeah.
connect that.
Yeah.
That I love math and what can I do with it? And I love
Well,
weather.
yeah, you said you were good at math
Yeah.
and you learned to
Yeah.
love it. Yeah. Um, and then you get to sort of just, I'm going to pour
I
this into these
did
kids,
both.
these
Yeah.
little buckets that are walking around, you know, high school and not knowing where they're going to go. But so I think that there's an opportunity. I was going to ask this question later on, but I'll ask it now. So you have this section that you teach of meteorology, of weather in high school. And I'm sure that you're able to go a little bit deeper in rather than just sort of superficially in a earth
Earth
science
space.
class. You can
Mm-hmm.
get a little
Yep.
deeper.
Yep. Oh, and
Are
we do.
there do you come across high school students who aren't just taking it because they're taking it, that they're passionate about it?
All kinds of students that come into my room. I actually do a little survey at the beginning of the year just to kind of get a feel for my students. And one of the things with teaching AP pre-calculus and teaching pre-calculus prior to that, I stay breaking hearts. I mean, we mend them in the end. I get them there, but it is a hard course, and a lot of my students, it is interesting journey with math, and the general mindset of not liking math, right? So it's not fun for either of us sometimes as a class and an educator, to get them to believe in themselves and get through the tough stuff. So my weather class, I intentionally make easy. Like, it is my break and their break, and we just get to have fun.
Oh, that's
And
great.
I still, we still learn and exam, on some very nuanced topics, but I keep everything very, 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 like, accessible for them on the meteorology front, as far as assessments go, so that I can go way above their heads and really dig into the science without scaring them. Like, your grade's going to be fine, but we are talking meteorology in this class, and the modeling and the nuances and atmospheric dynamics without the equations. And so, because I do tend to actually make the course as very accessible and easy as possible, one of my questions on my survey is, I'm here because I love weather and I'm interested in being a meteorologist. I'm here because I just need an elective to graduate. I'm here because my guidance counselor threw me in here just for my schedule. I'm here because I heard it's an easy A. And I've had to start adding an option. I'm here just because I heard Miss Thomas is nice. And I've had students tell me, like, that's why I'm here. You need to add that as an option. And I heard it enough, so I put it on there. But it's a mixed bag. I have a lot of kids that will come in just, my guidance counselor threw me in here. And then I can see them. I'm like, that's okay. You'll love weather by the time we're done. Like, buckle up, kid.
When in my high school, there was not a weather class. Most of my high school science classes were essentially either biology or chemistry. I don't think we ever ventured into any level of weather or meteorology. So the first meteorology class or weather class I had was at a junior college in the Florida Panhandle after I had graduated high school. A couple of years later at what's now Okaloosa-Walton State College, but back in those days it was Okaloosa-Walton Junior College,
Yeah.
and had a wonderful instructor in that class who was a former was a veteran who was teaching this class. And there are things that he instructed that, now this is going back some years, that I still, when I go talk to classes or go talk to schools, I will pull on some things that he said in that class because it was so impactful. And I knew that weather was where I was going to go study, and something about the weather and meteorology, but his passion and the fact that this was at a junior college level. So it was just sort of a, general studies, if you will. But
Yeah.
it was like, okay, this makes sense. He's making it interesting. And like I said, there's an example he gave about what's mostly cloudy, mostly sunny, clear. And he did it in such a way without technology that it
Yeah.
stuck with me,
Yeah.
forever. And I use it even to this day when I'm talking to schools. So
Yeah.
it's great that you have the ability in the high school level to affect at least somebody's thinking about their future. And I
Yeah.
applaud you for that, for sure.
And not just like, when you talk about, like, what the effect I can have with this class, right? Even with the kids that don't come in like really obsessed with weather, because they do come in. I got my little meteorologists excited to learn under a meteorologist. And the ones that kind of just filter in for various other reasons, I tell them all the time, I'm like, you may not leave this class on the path to become a meteorologist, but you are going to leave this class and make a huge impact on the community around you. And it is my hope. It is why I want to run this course at the local, like, high school level. And I call you all my weather birdies. Like, fly off, my little weather birdies, and help your neighbors understand the forecast better. Like, if that's all you get from this course, then this course is doing exactly what I dreamed it would do. And that is just, help more weather savvy citizens infiltrate Bay County and beyond. No matter what you go on to do, you're a banker, and there's, a concerning forecast, and your coworkers and their families are all worried, and they're not understanding, especially nowadays with, social media and the proliferation of like very confusing forecasts and messagings from so many different sources out there.
Absolutely.
It is confusing the general public. So the more we can educate the everyday person beyond just what maybe they used to need to be educated on to get their forecast, I feel that combating the social media confusion and messaging now is going to require helping educate the general public beyond what we used to with their understanding of weather dynamics and especially the communication of them. And so,
Believable point. I'm sitting there thinking about, the comment you just said, and when we share this podcast, and I'm going to highlight what you just said, because there's a reason why I'm doing this podcast, and there's a reason why it's being hosted in this community called Weather School, because I want there to be a community of people who just come there to learn exactly what you said, to get a little bit better understanding of the forecast, share their passion about the weather, and don't rely on, I wouldn't even call it misinformation. There's in some cases there's too much. And not that you have to be I'm holding all the information, you can only get it from me, but to be discerning about what you're reading
yes.
and what you're seeing. And so if there's knowledge to be gained in a community like what I'm trying to build, or what you're saying in your classroom, that they can then take and kind of like a mushroom grow in the real world.
And they're better able to like delineate good information from bad information, and not only for themselves but like a ripple effect for those around them.
Yep,
And
their
the more
family.
people that we can educate to that level to help raise other people up, I think that's our only path to combating the proliferation of too much information. Information overload is a real thing.
I mean, everybody can just, they pick up their phone and their forecast is on there immediately. But,
Mm-hmm.
Do you trust that implicitly, I guess,
Yeah.
is a question.
Well, and then even with the apps too, you have a basic forecast readily at your app, but do you have the nuances behind the hurricane coming? Do you have the nuances behind the severe weather setup that will bring tornadic activity to your home, or the blizzards that will shut a town down? The apps can only do so much, on that front, and then you have to rely on further input and being able to, with a bit of critical thinking and a more broader understanding of atmospheric sciences, know where to get that extra information from reliable sources. And yeah.
That's a great point. It's a great point. You had worked post-hurricane, and probably while you were on television, and maybe, and I believe while you're as a teacher now, on I think some important projects in where
Oh, yes.
you've been doing I know that you recorded some podcasts of your own, and then also creating a survey and documenting some, it's almost like it's not the stories, but more importantly, how lives were sort of impacted by this hurricane that we both sort of lived through, Hurricane Michael. If you could kind of recount what you even thought about to begin that, and then
Yeah.
how that project is going now.
Has evolved. Yeah. Well, when I came home before getting the job at the news station, I was just trying to kind of figure out something to do with my degree. So to keep busy, we were coming up on the first year of Hurricane Michael in 2019, that October. And so I thought of just doing a podcast type YouTube channel of just, I called it the voices, or the Hurricane Michael's voice. So like if you could hear the voice of a hurricane, it's going to be all these voices, right? And all their stories. And so I did 31 individuals for 31 days in October. And when I did that, towards the end of it, I realized, oh my gosh, I have this like nice sizable sample that I can keep in contact with over the years. And I started to, consider the fact that, with media of all types, a lot of the story is the more sensational day one. And now I have learned, and I think a lot of people have learned, a lot of times, with the intricacies of recovery, sometimes day one's the easiest part.
Mm.
It's the most sensational part, visually, but it can be the easiest part with what some families have to go through in the years ahead from recovering from it. And what actually inspired me to do the project too is Hurricane Katrina victims on an NPR episode I was listening to. A lady had called in and said, "Hey, Hurricane Michael victims, you guys are going through recovery right now. It's your first couple of weeks, but you need to know it's going to be years before you feel normal again. And even 5 or 6, 7, 8 years, there'll be nuances that stay with you that you won't see coming. And so I'm here to tell you right now, expect that. It's normal. It is on the way." And oh, that touched me so much. And I was like, I want to do that on a bigger scale, like an actual project of like hurricane victims from major hurricanes 3, 4, and 5 talking to future hurricane victims, so that it's such a unique experience, as you know, that when you move through it, you can feel so lonely. And to know that they can Google and find all these voices and, like, just the various projects out there, mine being one of them, hopefully, where it's like, we're not talking about day one, we're talking about day 365 times 2 times 3 times 4,
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
and not feel so aloof, or I mean aloft in that journey, like floating. And who do I talk to about this? Because how many people across the globe go through that? Not very many.
not
A
yeah,
few more now in the past couple of years.
yeah. It's for the yeah,
And that's what my imagination was just to have more voices, to because we are forecasting more of these, down the road, and there will be more people and communities that go through it. So the more data we can get on long-term recovery to help people better understand what they're going to be moving through, was my overall kind of goal. So I'm circling back, um 5 years in, just kind of curious about how year 5 went. And now I've expanded beyond the 31 people. Now I'm about to put out a post on my social medias of just, let's get a bigger sample population. Let's like try to turn this into an actual study of long-term hurricane recovery. And then I want to, everybody that I get contact info for or has been a part of year 1, year 5, I imagine doing a year 10. And then after year 10, probably sit down with the people that know how to publish a study and be like, here's my data, here's my hundreds and hundreds of long-term recovery documentation and the nuances and things that a lot of people don't think about, as far like, your town eventually starts to look a little normal after years. The trees have come back, the green has come back. But has your PTSD under a typical summer thunderstorm gone down a little bit? And for some people, it hasn't 6 years after the fact. My personal story that I'll keep very short: in my family, we had, mental health sensitive family member who, we do feel that the hurricane deteriorated their mental health in a way that is very significant, even to this day, and sometimes heartbreaking manner. And we sometimes wonder, like, would it be as bad had she not been under a category 5 hurricane with a sensitive mind? And so, long-term mental health implications that are life-changing in some changes, like that don't fully recover from, kind of, aspects that I want to explore more for people out there. And then career changes, I've got a lot of answers coming back. Do you have the same job you had, kind of thing? And how did your career shift? And what kind of opportunities became more limited in the town to you? Because of healthcare is still huge. The implications on healthcare, the lack of certain specialties in the area that we had prior to the hurricane that we don't have after the hurricane, because just of a lot of those specialists having to move away.
that's
And
right.
it's taking time to get them back.
Yeah,
Just so many things I want to explore. And so that's how it's evolved.
I mean, the passion starts it, and then you've just led with that, but the integrity of following it up to create this database. Sure, there's statistics and numbers, but the stories, like you said, the voices that can still be told. Now, I think back to when Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida in 1992. The state population, I think the state of Florida's population was 7 million, maybe 8 million at the time. Now it's 25 million. And
Yeah.
so there was this period of time from 2000, I want to say 5 through 2016, where there were no hurricane landfalls in the state of Florida. So all of these millions of people moved to the state, the infrastructure to the coastline, because everybody wants to live by the coast, and then puts them in direct impact whenever the storms start coming back, which they've now done now since for the last, well, really since Hermine in 16
Yeah.
to,
Very active.
yeah, it's been another active cycle. So there's more and more people getting exposed to the true dangers. So, like you said, hearing that voice from Katrina and being able to now have these other voices in a database of for historical purposes, I think that's a wonderful, wonderful project. And one thing that I want to do when I publish this podcast, I want to make sure all that
Oh
information, whatever you want
yes.
to share,
Yes. Yeah,
is
absolutely.
linked and shared as well,
Yeah.
because I think it's important for people to kind of go and look at your story and look at these stories, because this is the true reason for the podcast project,
Yeah.
is for people like you to not only tell their stories, but who are having an impact on lives
Yeah. Who
for generations, which I think is
are synced into other stories. Yeah.
that's right.
An
That's an
avenue to them.
awesome project. And I know for me, from absolute personal standpoint, the hurricane, I still have these sensitivities that it's like, you know what, I don't really care to talk about that,
Yeah.
or even, in recounting the story, I can't be dispassionate about some of these things. It's like there's the emotion is still pretty raw in
Well,
regard to.
and sometimes even, with my experience with my family member, if you have, like, and a lot of us do that, it heals, but it can still be, you can feel the wound
Yes.
very, very intensely when you start messing with the wound. And I think that is, there are some, individuals that have shared that, like, I don't know if I can go down that path again to share it. And I think that's a phenomenal response, because that response needs to be documented as well, because that is a very, very valid response to healing and moving along the journey, is recognizing that, can I do this? Like, can I go back to that place while I'm so, so still connected to it? And for my particular family member, I do not advise that.
No, it's such an honorable thing for you to be doing. But not you've got your career and you're working and doing all your things, and then still have this passion project on your side. I think that's awesome. Yeah. Well, Melissa, we have talked for a while, and your
Yeah.
story is just, it's heartwarming, and it's also inspiring. And I applaud you for where you are now. What's your future? What's going on with your
Yeah.
teaching, and where do you go from here?
Well, thank you for those kind words, by the way. I just honestly try staying to keep up with, my wonderful mentors that I've had through life, such as yourself, and all of my wonderful professors and bosses from any job that was not even meteorology related. Like, and now my current peers and my current leadership, I constantly, like, my response to anything that has to do with my performance is like, just trying to keep up with you. And I won't lie, I did steal that from my sweetheart. It's a great response.
Yeah,
But it is true, though. I do stay trying to keep up with the people that have inspired me. And as far as the future goes, this is it. I think I have found my calling. I am very, very content and fulfilled. I found that common denominator that I wanted to be a part of. That I love what I do. So I see myself in education for the next 30 or more years,
nice.
and then as well as my peripheral projects.
Yeah,
So that really is, my goal, is just to grow as an educator, and then make sure I'm also carving out time to grow as a meteorologist in the freelance world, in the research world. I still forecast on my social medias, and then just keep evolving those projects that I'm working on.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, with the help of everybody that's involved with them.
So you don't sleep, I guess. No, I'm just kidding.
Sometimes no.
Well, I'd be remiss. I think it's very imperative that you're at Arnold High School, correct?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
Arnold High School in Panama
Arnold High
City
School, which
Beach.
is in Panama City Beach,
Yep.
Florida, and they are the Marlins, and I don't know why I even said that.
Well, I love it because I actually graduated. I was in the Bay District school system from, elementary to middle school to high school, and I graduated as a Rutherford Ram.
Yeah.
So all my Rutherford alumni are like, "You traitor," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a Marlin now."
Well, there you go. Well, we'll leave it at that. I appreciate your time today, your story as well. I look forward to sharing it here on the podcast project. And like I said, we'll link everything we can possibly link to your work, and we'll go from there. But
Yeah,
in the meantime, thanks so much,
thank
and
you.
have a great time. Have a great life.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me on. I wish you so much success with this podcast. And I'm so excited to, like, watch the future voices and the future stories that you get to share out there, and the ripple effect it's gonna have on the communities everywhere. I'm
Well,
excited to see it.
That's awesome for you to
Thank
share.
you.
We share it. We'll end it there. Thank you again.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Weather School Podcast Project. To see all the episodes of the Podcast Project, please visit skool.com/weatherschool/about. Become a member and join the Weather School community.